Call this meeting to order. This is a Tuesday, January 9th, 2018 study session. And let's take roll.
Mayor Mangarelli,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Orr,
Here.
Councilman Blair,
Yes.
Councilman Good,
Here.
Councilman Lamerson,
Here.
Councilwoman Scholl,
Here.
Councilman Sischka,
Here.
all are present.
Thank you. Looks like we have two items on the agenda today from Public Works for one, and then City False Alarm Ordinance. And we do have comment cards. Maureen, you have comment cards out?
Yes.
So if you want to speak, please feel free to grab a comment card, and we'll open that up after the presentations. So you want to start with Public Works? Mark?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Mark DeBroy, the city drainage engineer and floodplain administrator. And so today I'll be talking about our update to our floodplain ordinance. The first slide I wanted to, the first slide I wanted to start with is why we're here presenting today. Number one, our FEMA maps have been revised and they're going to go into effect on March 6th. So I'll be talking about that in the body of the presentation. Secondly, we are required to have an updated floodplain ordinance by the time those maps become effective. So I'll talk about that in the presentation. And then we'll be looking for approval of the ordinance at the January 23rd session. I'll start with kind of an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the National Flood Insurance Program. Many of you are familiar with it, but some may not be. I'm going to talk a little bit about our floodplain map revision and where we stand with that. Then I'll go into the ordinance, and then I'm going to talk about something called the community rating system, which bears on both of those. So the National Flood Insurance Program is something that was started in the late 60s in response to a lot of flooding and hurricane type losses. Insurance really wasn't available to folks, and at that time it was mostly disaster assistance to folks that the federal government was giving out. So they started the program to basically offer insurance to people in the United States, and in return for that the cities and counties that participate in the program would regulate development and uses within the floodplain to, number one, try and prevent more losses from occurring and from non-conforming construction to be built. They were having a lot of trouble with something would flood, they'd rebuild it, it'd flood again, they'd rebuild it. So at a certain point they said, we've got to stop that and have a reasonable program for stopping that from happening. The city, we began participating in 1977. That's an important date for us. And one of the things that goes along with administering the flood insurance program is floodplain maps. And accuracy is a very important part of that, which leads me to my next slide. The floodplain map revision, when we started in 1977, we had most of our mapping around that time, so the maps are somewhat outdated. They were based on older data, and conditions have changed quite a bit since then. So we began a revision effort about 7 years ago. We had consultants do all of the technical work that FEMA required and submitted those to FEMA. The new maps are going to be based on newer and better data is one of the ways in which they term that at FEMA, meaning we have better topographic data, we have better computer programs to do the simulations, and we get a much better result, a much more accurate result. We are revising the maps on a citywide basis. We have a number of named creeks, and we have, I believe, 12 different panels for the floodplain, so the entire citywide is what we're doing. And as I said before, those new maps will become effective on March 6th. The floodplain ordinance also dates from the 1977 era. It's been updated in minor ways over the years to reflect certain needs. The revision that we're presenting is something that's required by FEMA. They want it to reflect current National Flood Insurance Program language. They have something called a state model ordinance, which over the years, they have evolved that kind of on a national level so that everybody has very similar language in their ordinances to make it easier for everybody to be on the same page with what FEMA is expecting us to do as a participant in the program. One of the things that they told us is that we have to have it effective preceding the new maps coming out. So we're on a time frame for that to get that passed.
You have to have it to be a participant.
Correct, yes.
Okay, we don't have to have it, but to be a participant in their program, we do.
Correct, yes.
So I just want to make that clear, you know, that it's not the federal government coming in here with a armband on their arm ordering us.
Right. It is a mutually beneficial relationship in the sense that we regulate the floodplains and they make insurance available to our community. And that's the give and take on that. One of the things I really wanted to point out about the Floodplain Ordinance update is that FEMA has made no substantive changes to their program in recent years. I'll talk about some of the changes that they have made on the next slide, but essentially the way we've been regulating to this point, we're going to continue to do so. My last bullet point, I'm going to talk about a future amendment for the community rating system, and I'll talk about that. As far as what is changing in this floodplain ordinance, as I said, there's nothing substantive in terms of the actual items that we're enforcing. They, for the most part, reorganized, reworded, and reworked the same content to get the kind of language they like to see in it on a national basis. We did add some statutory authorizations and findings of facts purpose, that kind of boilerplate up front in the ordinance. We updated a number of the definitions to be more consistent with the program. And then there was 2 new sections that were added about violation removals and costs. But as I said, the substantive part of our participation and administration is going to be the same. We will still require people to be 1 foot above base flood elevation. We'll still require flood proofing and all the elements that go with that. The community rating system is a voluntary system where when a local entity adopts and enforces higher regulatory standards than the minimum standards, because the state model represents the minimum standards for the NFIP program. Anytime you do additional things to give a higher protection level to your community, you earn points, and those points work towards getting a discount for any policyholders in your community. It is an optional participation program. Yavapai County participates. We do as well. Chino Valley and Prescott Valley do not. So with our rating, the county's rating was a 6, and they're currently a 7. Our rating was a 7, and we're currently 8. Every point where you drop from number 10, you start at number 10 in the program and work down from that, gets a 5% discount for policyholders. So we're currently at a 10% discount for policyholders. The rating changes that the county and the city experienced recently was due to evaluation under new criteria under the community rating system program. We were previously rated under a 2007 manual, and they updated it to a 2013 manual. So when we had our most recent rating visit in 2015, they rated us under that. Their scoring changed. They have a pretty complex scoring system, a lot of percentages and multipliers and whatnot. So we and the county both ended up losing 1 point in that CRS system. So the reason I want to bring that up relative to our floodplain ordinance is that we received the evaluation from the CRS folks in mid-December, and we'd like to take some time to digest that and figure out where we'd like to go with our CRS program. If we're fine staying at 8, if we want to go back to earning a 7, and we'll have to figure out what items of the CRS program to put back into our ordinance. So after some number of months of us evaluating that, we'll be coming back to council with a recommendation for what we can put back in for the CRS system. And then after that, then certainly we'll look at it in the future for, periodic reviews for how well things are working and tweak things as we need it.
Could I ask you a question? we seem to have floodplains that change every few years. Is that what I'm getting in 70 or in 2006? It was different than it is today?
FEMA has updated parts of their program over the years. For the most part, our actual maps, then the studies they're based on, have not changed. In 2010, they had, which was our last real update in the sense that they reissued all the maps. That was really to update to a digital format. Prior to that, it was all paper. So in 2010, they took the maps that we had from 2001 and just put them in a digital format. Certain things changed somewhat inadvertently when they tried to, when you have paper maps, you don't necessarily care if the edges match, but when you're in a digital world, you have to stretch and fit things. So there were some inadvertent changes. That's one of the things that led to our maps being really inaccurate enough that we really wanted to pursue new mapping.
So do you foresee the same process happening in the future?
Not from the transition to the digital world. Hopefully now that we're in the digital world and all these products are created based on that platform, we won't have that kind of problem. With the newer and better data methods that we're using today, we do have a much better product than we had. It's not that there won't be some areas where we look at the mapping and say, goodness gracious, that doesn't make sense, and we'll try to deal with those as we come upon them. But to answer your first question, they don't change that often, and most of the mapping that we currently have in place was from much older topographic data and earlier computer methods.
I guess the concern that I have is that people buy property based on a map at a certain time. And all of a sudden, you tell them, oh, gee, now part of your property isn't able to be used the same way it was when you bought it. And they're looking at me going, Councilman, it hasn't flooded there not only in 100 years, but 500 years. And they view it as a taking, and they also view it as, okay, I've heard more than once, okay, guys, FEMA needs money, so they're, the insurance program needs customers, and so they're expanding their floodplain maps. So, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying that that's what I'm hearing. And people are fearful that, they're buying a pig in a poke because FEMA may come out or, and have new requirements for your floodplain maps.
To answer your last question first, FEMA is not changing their floodplains for the insurance side of things. So those two parts of the program are separate. One of the primary reasons why we wanted to restudy all of our floodplains is because of the inaccuracy of older maps. So it's not about putting people in or taking them out. It's really about properly recognizing the flood hazard, because some people that thought they were not in the floodplain but actually are, they've faced a risk that was unidentified for them. So if you have a property and there really is a risk of flooding, you'd rather know about it. And if you're on a property that really does not have a high risk of flooding, then you certainly don't want to pay insurance if you don't have to. So really for us, it's about the accuracy of the mapping and just doing a better job of administering. So we don't have nonsense kind of situations where somebody's paying insurance and they shouldn't, and somebody's building in a floodplain when they shouldn't.
But this is a work in progress. So in the future, 10 years into the future doesn't mean that this is the end-all and be-all floodplain map. 10 years into the future, it could change.
If FEMA made changes to their program, yes, there are things like that they could do. They haven't, like I say, they haven't made substantive changes to the way in which mapping is done, except for using better data and newer programs. They did make changes in 2012 and 2014 on the insurance side of things. So in terms of generating more revenues for the program, because the program is operating in the red, some of the things they have done away with or will be phasing out are some grandfathering programs that they've had. Those are on the insurance side of their house. They don't affect us from a regulatory standpoint when it comes to regulating development, but it definitely impacts our residents for sure.
Well, I appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Mark, Councilman.
Also, Mark, Was the data collection on your side of it and you're submitting that to FEMA, or does FEMA do GPS mapping and things like that and create their own data and their own maps from that data?
Good question. Early in the program, back in the 60s and 70s, when nobody had any data, FEMA, on the federal level, they spent federal dollars to get mapping in place so the communities had something to regulate to, which is one reason why those are pretty broad strokes on a lot of the floodplains. Over the years, they have transferred that aspect to the local agencies. What we did in, I believe it was 2009, we had what's called a Cooperating Technical Partners Agreement, a CTP agreement with FEMA, where they gave us a grant of, I think it was $350,000 or $80,000, and we used that money to hire a consultant that did the mapping and did the study for us. So it's a cooperative program where they want us to do the work, but they give us grant money to do some of those things. Not everything, but some
The
things.
second question, you're saying that by meeting these standards, our residents have the potential for getting a possibly lower premium. But call me a skeptic, if you will. Usually federal regulations have some regulatory burden whenever they offer a little carrot like that. So is that burden increasing, and what are the strings attached to this?
So the two parts to the program are the basic part, which is the National Flood Insurance Program, all the minimum requirements that we have just to participate so that they'll provide flood insurance. The second is the Community Rating System, the CRS program. That's where if we do more, they'll give us a better discount. So that's the carrot and stick on that. If we don't participate in the CRS, then we would not earn any discounts. So with the CRS, one of the reasons why we want to carefully evaluate how our rating turned out this last time and look to how we want to modify that for the future is to look at not only the regulatory burden on city staff, but also the burden it would place on the community. Certain things you can get credit for that aren't a burden, like community outreach and some of those softer things. Other higher regulatory standards might include increasing a water surface or height requirements for homes or other hard kind of improvements that would give us more resiliency. So the CRS program is an important aspect, but it's beyond the minimum NFIP requirements.
Thank you.
Councilman Lamerson?
Thank you, Mayor. Mark, in the past, we discussed some of this at UDC, and I asked a question there with regards to catastrophic stuff that happens, like what they're going through in California right now. Because now what wasn't unsafe because of a fire is unsafe. We had a Goodwin Street fire, or Goodwin fire, we had an Indian fire, we had a Dosey fire. You know, while you may not change certain things with regards to what FEMA looks at, when we're in the city and we look at unintended consequences when we do certain things, when we draft our policy, we don't live in a vacuum. We know certain things can happen. Okay, like when we had the flood of, probably about 1983, 84, when you had 3 feet of water coming down Gurley Street, and then we put in the drainage and all that stuff, so you didn't have that anymore. So all those businesses in that area weren't getting flooded. Are there things built into the new proposed code that FEMA takes into consideration with regards to the travel of water for the rating?
In regard specifically to fire, they do not. I know FEMA over in the past decade has tried to take a multi-hazard approach to public safety in communities. Obviously, some parts of the country, they're looking at tornadoes and hurricanes in ways that we do not. They have not incorporated anything in regard to forest fires, and that is a real threat for us in the West. City of Flagstaff dealt with that after their Schultz fire, where they had multiple flooding issues based on that. And certainly California right now is experiencing rainfall on big burned areas, so that is a real threat. And cross our fingers that we don't face that here, but that is a possibility. specifically, they do not have an element of the program that I'm aware of to deal with that. But that's one of the things that we'll look at within, if they do have something, it would be within the CRS component of their program, and we may be able to do something there and get some credit for that.
Thank you for your response.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. So Mark, I want to make sure I understand this. So the county participates in the CRS,
Correct.
and we do, but Chino Valley and Prescott Valley do not.
Correct.
But it sounds like we actually got dinged because we're participating in this because our points actually went down. So when you go back and you look at what they submitted to you, then will you be looking at whether or not we should actually be in this program? Is that one of the questions that you're going to have?
I would say we should be in the program. The question is more of what level of participation. When a community first enters the program, you start at number 10. That's how their system works. So the lower the number, the more the discount. So if Chino Valley, and 10 is 0 discount. So Chino Valley and Prescott Valley right now get 0 discount.
Oh, I thought you said that they were actually got, okay, then I misunderstood.
Right. It's weird the way they do their numbers backwards.
I
but-
misunderstood. Got it.
I think we kind of hijacked your presentation. Were you
No,
done?
that's fine. Yeah, we were right there towards the end. Yep, that was the last slide, that just essentially on the next step, we'd just be looking for approval on the 23rd. And then, as I said on previous slide, we'll be back to council in the not too distant future once we've had a chance to evaluate our CRS position.
Other questions, comments from Art?
What's our current ranking?
We are currently at an 8, so we get a 10% discount. Every numeric number you drop, you get a 5% discount. The average in the state of Arizona is between a 7 and an 8. So we're still in the mix of things. There's some communities that have 6s, very few that have a 5, and I'm not sure if anybody has a 4. But so most participants are in that 7 to 8 range that do participate.
Or do we have the potential to get to 7 without too much work, or what?
And that's what we'll have to do. Under the 2007 rating criteria, we did, but under the 2013, we did not with the current activities that we do. So we just have to be smart in what activities we want to continue to do or add to the mix to see if we can easily get that 7 back. It'd be nice if we could get to a 7. I don't think we'd have enough staff or to go to a 6 and the kinds of things that would be required with that, but that's something that we'll look at.
Anyone else? Mark, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your expertise on
You're
this.
welcome.
Thank
Very
you.
welcome.
All right, we'll move on to false alarm ordinance. Chief?
It's way too high. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Happy New Year, since I haven't seen most of you since the 1st. This is in follow-up to the November 28th presentation I made to previous council related to the alarm program. Just a reminder, and to create the context, is the goal of our alarm program, which is supported by the ordinance, is to reduce police response and decrease associated costs for false alarm activation due to negligent installation, maintenance, or operation. And just to support the need for this discussion, this further discussion, 99.8% of our responses are to false alarms, and that represents 8% of our total calls for service. So there is room for improvement. In 2017, we had about 2,200 responses to false alarms. So the options I presented on November 28th were do nothing, accept things as they are. This is just the cost of doing business. Or to explore a verified response program, or to bring back recommended changes to the ordinance that would support program improvement. The direction from the council at that time was to come back with a revised ordinance, which is what we'll talk about today. So the draft ordinance, and I did not do a PowerPoint because you have the draft in front of you. The changes that we've recommended are based on model policy, input from council members, the community, as well as working closely with city legal, specifically John Palladini, We also conferred with the Arizona Alarm Association and the National Alarm Association that works closely with the industry to incorporate their recommendations for what has worked in other communities. So what you see before you is some cleanup language. You'll see that the police chief is no longer only in the male pronoun, and other things. That wasn't the only improvement there. We have exempted government agencies, as I presented on November 28th. We have the inability to fine federal government. We are administratively taking responsibility for city facilities, and really no other government entity proves to be an issue in this area. So we would restore the exemption to government agencies. Major change is that we would request that all alarms be registered. And throughout the course of this, just a reminder, this does not include panic alarms, medical alarms, or robbery alarms. These are only burglary, intrusion sorts of alarm systems. So the registration, currently you do not have to register an alarm until you have a false activation. So there's extra work that's involved in tracking down who the alarm holder is, having all that information. In anticipation of this, our business license application does include all of the information that we would need in our application. So any business that is a licensed business in the city of Prescott would not have to submit anything additional. It's an online form for anyone else that does not fall into the business license category. It's very simple. We would ask that they review it every year and update any information. And there's no charge, no cost to registration. So that's a major change in the ordinance. We also made some changes to the appeal process language, and this came specifically from conversation with two council members, that currently you have a false alarm, we send you a notice, say you have to register. There's no information about, but wait, my alarm or my power failed, or there was a cable line cut, and there's a good reason not within my control that my alarm activated. This should not count against me. We only started accepting those appeals at the third alarm. So that escalation process had already started, so we want to move that up. So we don't want to charge somebody with a false alarm that truly was not within their control. Another major change is the fine structure, and I just put that in there, that we can have a lot of discussion about what that looks like, and when that fine structure begins. But currently it doesn't escalate the dollar amount, but and the other thing I would propose is that at some point, whatever your recommendation is, early in the process, that an alarm holder can take an online class and waive that initial fee. Part of the discussion here with council members was we don't want people to assume risk because they want to avoid a fine. So, and none of this is about revenue generation. In my mind, none of this is about revenue or cost recovery. We're not going to get close to recovering our costs for responding to this number of calls. We want the community to be safe. We want those that choose to use an alarm system to be able to rely on our response, but do hold that responsibility to a higher regard so we don't have repetitive false responses to their home or business. The final major change would be chronic abusers, which we would recommend, just looking at the data, would be 5 or more within a calendar year, that we move them to a verified response model, meaning we're not automatically going to go, but if there's audio, video, or witness of some activity, some intrusion, then we would respond to that. And we would be working with this and most of their businesses. We would be working with that business long before they got to that point. So I think that we would see far fewer. I mean, we only have 6 anyway, but we would have far fewer at that 5 or more number anyway. So I'll stop now and answer questions and take your recommendations on specifically the fine structure.
Great, thanks, Chief. Councilman Good?
Chief, I know Prescott Valley has just initiated this verified response process. Do you have any kind of data on other communities that are implementing this, and has it really been a solution?
Depends on what you, how you define solution. It's a solution to responding to a couple of thousand calls for service that turn out not to be something that an officer is needed at. And that's, as I understand it, the goal of Prescott Valley was they wanted to reduce that response that really wasn't to anything meaningful. There are very few communities around the country, and I had the number in my notes somewhere, very few that have adopted this. Some have adopted it and then reversed it because it did represent a danger they felt to business owners or residents that take on this assumed risk of checking out something on their own. And there's only one other community in Arizona that has verified response, and that's Surprise, and I'm not aware of any issues that have arisen from that. My position in the times that I've been before council is that we can always go to that. I would rather try some other things first, because I think that we can improve on these numbers by creating a stronger partnership between the industry, business and homeowners that have alarms, and the police department to turn some of this around.
Well, that's the way I see it right now. I think the taxpayers in general are subsidizing those irresponsible alarm users that are not responding and not managing this process in a responsible manner. So by assigning multiple false alarms a charge, in essence, we're creating a user fee, which I think is appropriate here.
And it also is an incentive to improve on whatever condition that's creating that false response.
Thank you.
Councilman Lamerson?
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, it looks a lot better than it did to me. And thank you very much for having conference with some of us. I will ask you again, 2,200 is a lot, okay? I think the community has a responsibility to understand not only are we challenged with manpower, there's a dollar value associated with that. With 2,200 unauthorized disarmaments of a piece of equipment that police respond to, do you have any idea what that costs this community?
Councilman Lamerson, I didn't calculate that.
I know it's normally one officer, if not two.
It's intended to be two, and it could be more depending on the size of the premise.
So that was my point I was trying to get to, so that the public out there understands 2,200 in a course of a year is a lot.
It is a lot.
And what you're doing 2,200 times is you're taking cops off their duty. And you're challenging an already challenged group of people to try and enforce and keep peace and tranquility and all that other stuff. So I really think the ordinance is appropriate. I think we've tweaked through a lot of different things. So I don't particularly care for overstretch of government, but sometimes when the public won't do for themselves what they can, they don't have a right to, as Councilman Good was saying, burden the rest of the community because they haven't taken care of their private property.
And there are a number, and you make some very, very good points, and I appreciate that. There are a number of alarm holders that we never hear from. We don't even know that they have an alarm because it's never generated a response from the police department, and so they're carrying the burden as well. So we want more to be in that group than in the other.
Councilman Siska? I said it
Thank
right.
you, Mayor. Yeah, you kind of got it. Chief, it's good to see you here. How many false alarms would qualify you as an abuser?
5 or more within
5 or more.
calendar year, yeah.
Okay, and what percentage of that 2,200 came from abusers? Could you guess?
Percentage, no, but, and so the numbers are not distinct. So there were 243 times that we fined an alarm holder. So that was the third time we had been there. And then there's another 17, but they're not distinct numbers. So the number that was counted in the fine of $400 is also counted in the 500 because they keep escalating that amount. So the looking at our 2017 data, there would be roughly 6 businesses that we would no longer be responding to because we would designate them as a chronic abuser. There would be a lot of communication prior to that point. There'd be, as much interaction with them and their alarm company as we could create from our side. We, at that point, would have fined them, in my mind, significantly. And if they still can't fix whatever it is, and some of them it's employees, and they have a lot of turnover. So, but somebody has to take responsibility for that because we keep going there for no good purpose.
Are homes or businesses the biggest abusers?
Businesses. And it is just looking at the list, not naming names. It is they are companies that have a lot of turnover.
Maybe we should name names.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Chief, great job. And Deputy Chief Bonnie, it's good to see you here, and thank you for all the work you've done on this. I see some real pluses. Number one, I appreciate that you've used the business license as a tool, and I think that will help us. The other is, I think you're absolutely right, it's about educating the public and reaching out to the industry and making that all better. I know I was concerned when I saw PV went to the verified response totally, and I think there's a point where that has, I think 5 makes sense. And then, like you said, if we need to revisit this, you'll have data. We can come back, revisit. But I think after 5, that makes some sense. And on the fee structure, the fine, I think that looks good too. So good job. I think both of you should be really commended for all that you've done on this. So thank you.
Councilman Good.
Yeah, I think I'd be somewhat reluctant to adopt a verified response option at this point. I think there's minimal evidence to support that, and there might be some significant unintended consequences that may come from it, even though, at 99.8% false, that equates to about 5 or 6 legitimate concerns in a year, and those might be serious. So we certainly have the option of monitoring Prescott Valley's decision to move into this area and see if it really does have a cost-effective result without endangering the public. But I think I would be supportive of this escalating fine for businesses that are not really handling this in a responsible manner. Thank you.
Councilman Blair.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, thank you. And Amy, thank you very much. It's a lot better as far as I'm concerned. But my concern would be the ones that are the chronic users that are 5 times and more. Have you put any kind of determination on whether those are important businesses? I mean, we have a lot of gun dealers in Prescott area, manufacturers.
Yeah, that is not the case.
Okay, and then that's what my concern was, and
Very valid.
knowing that you are going to try to deal with these folks. Now, I don't know what that means, whether you're going to put, a watchdog on them or bring them in and have communication with them. I think whatever you do has to be serious enough where they understand it. But I think by doing that, I think we'll correct some of our problems in a big way. And the more you affect their pocketbook, the better off we're going to be.
I agree.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Siska.
Already, thank you. Is there a certain category, I'm not asking you to name businesses, but is there a certain category of business that seems to be a chronic abuser?
So we see some retail, those that aren't open 24 hours, and kind of related would be, fast food, and then some office complex sorts of businesses.
Thank you.
Is that vague enough? Vague and specific?
That's vague enough, yes, thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? Anything from the public, Maureen?
No, Mayor.
No? Okay. Well, Chief Blank, yeah.
Yeah, on the fine structure, currently, I have the second false alarm would generate a $100 fine that could be waived with a class. Is that your desire?
I think it's good.
Okay. And then just keeping that $100 fine going and working with them. What we haven't done effectively and what the Arizona Alarm Industry or Association has agreed to help us with is working with the alarm providers that serve Prescott. They will help us notify individuals with alarms of their need to register. They will help us work through whatever issues might be coming up in terms of whether it's technology maintenance or operation, human error, animal error, whatever it is. But I do think that we will be very committed to our desire to work with people and not just penalize them. And I think that communication with the industry, with those that are having trouble with their alarm, and if they're still not interested in cooperating, then they can write us checks. But I think that will make a big difference. And the way I want to measure effectiveness is at the end of the year, look at how many subscribers had 0 false activations, because that, in my mind, is what success is.
Chief, do you have your arms around how many different vendors of alarm systems there are in town?
I really don't. That hasn't been part of this work thus far. So we really want to engage with those partners and get them to help us solve it, because they're the ones that had a very, very strong reaction to what Prescott Valley did. And they know that is possible in this region. They will be very eager, in my mind, to work with us.
You mentioned that a lot of turnover creates maybe false alarms, maybe folks don't know how to use it or whatever. What about just antiquated or old equipment? Do you see that being an issue as well?
Not as much. Most everything is, because of technology and because of being web-based or wireless, it's as current as can be. So that's really not an issue.
A quick question, if I can. Thanks, Mayor. I set off an alarm just the other day.
Shame on you.
Unknowingly, I won't say where it was at, but it was very interesting because I think there needs to be an education of those alarm companies. I know in this specific house that I was in, that I set the alarm off, they called the house and I answered and they said, "Do you need to have an officer to the home?" I said, "Well, what if I'm the burglar?" And they said, "Do you have the code?"
Right.
And I gave them the code, so they checked and verified to make sure that I was a legitimate person to be there. And I would say if I wasn't a legitimate person to be there, they're not going to tell me, "Yeah, I need the police." So I think they just need to have some updated skills that, they can hire anybody they want to answer these security systems, and it could be Joe Blow off the street. And I think some education needs to go along with that somewhere down the line. So.
Well, and we're looking forward to getting to know that part of the process a lot better, and I'd actually like to see their call center and understand their processes. The other thing that we allow is for cancellation. So in that event, if you realized, I did set this off, I have legitimate reason for being here, you could call the alarm company or you could call us and say, "Don't respond, I did this." And that way, we're not wasting our time. And that's a new aspect to our operation as well.
I think that's good.
Chief, I have one question. Excuse me, Mayor. So when you say call you, Is that a 911 call, or what's the
So
number?
when it goes to the alarm call center, which everybody uses, apparently all of the alarm companies here, it goes down in the valley, and they call us on a non-emergency line.
Okay. But if I set the alarm off somehow
Yeah.
at my store and couldn't turn it off,
But you don't need us.
but I
Right.
don't need you
You can call us and we'll cancel it.
at a non-911
Yeah.
number?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
If you call 911, we'll move you to a non-emergency number.
Thank you.
If that's the only one you can remember, we'll get you where you need to be.
It's on your card.
Councilman Lamerson.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Similar to what Blair was relating to you, sometimes response on the other end of a telephone monitoring system's kind of dumb. They ask the wrong questions of the wrong people. And so I agree with you that education's very important, and that comes on the legs of the people that are supplying the alarms, not necessarily the people that are
Exactly.
buying them. And then one of the things I really appreciate about the redo of the proposed ordinance is the acknowledgement of the electronic equipment of failures such as Cable One and the things that happen that are not in the control of the individual proprietor of the private property, nor of the company providing the service.
Right. All right, thank you. I'll be back on the 23rd.
Thank you, Chief. See nothing else, we'll adjourn. Thanks.